Hello and welcome to our studies in God's Word. Today we begin a new series of studies. We have been studying the Psalms on Tuesdays. But today I'm going to begin a new series of studies in which each study begins with a different letter of the alphabet. Like today's study begins with A, and it's the word attitude. This Thursday, I'm going to post a study with the word B, and that word's going to be boldness. And I'm going to go all the way through the alphabet, all the way to Z. You say, well, Brother Tommy, why would you do that? Well, in the book of the Psalms, Psalm 119 is the longest psalm in the Old Testament, in the entirety of all the Psalms. And the reason it's so long is that it's divided into 22 sections. Each section begins with a different letter, one of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And so today, we begin this series of studies with a study A, with a study that begins with the word A. And study number one is attitude. And I've entitled it, Attitude, Are You Living Too Low? Attitude, are you living too low? Years ago, my mentor and pastor, Brother Mike Dawson, was on a plane on the tarmac at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. And it was a complete snowstorm. Brother Mike said you couldn't even see. And he thought there's no way they're going to take this plane is going to take off. Brother Mike said, sure enough, they de-iced the wings, they taxied out onto the runway, and before you knew it, they were bursting up into the clouds, into the midst of this snowstorm. He said the plane rocked backwards and forwards as it went through the clouds, and then suddenly it broke out into brilliant sunshine above the clouds. About that time, the pilot came over the intercom and said, this is your captain speaking, and I just wanted to make this little observation. You see, was truly a beautiful day all along outside. It was a beautiful day all along. We were all just living too low. Brother Mike said he quickly wrote that down to remember it. It was a beautiful day outside, but everyone was just living too low. And a long time ago, someone penned the words that have almost become a cliche in our world, in our society. They almost have no meaning. They've been so overused. And the phrase that I'm talking about is your attitude determines your altitude in life. And even though that phrase, your attitude determines your altitude in life, even though it almost has no meaning, it's been so overused. The truth is this: you can deny it, you can be bored by it, you can let it run off your mind like water off of a deck that's been sealed with Thompson's water seal. You can reject it, but the fact of the matter, it's true. Your attitude is going to color every part of your life. It was the Apostle Paul who said to the Philippian church in Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I will say rejoice. Here's a man who's in prison, whose ministry has come to a halt, who has a goal to go to Rome and then to Spain, and all that has been shut down. And yet, in the midst of that, he writes the most joy-infused letter in the entire New Testament, the letter to the Philippians. And he says to the Philippians, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say rejoice. Just like the psalmist said in Psalm 100, shout joyfully to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful singing. Know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us and not we ourselves. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name, for the Lord is good. His loving kindness is everlasting and his faithfulness to all generations. Now, here's some things that I know. There's a lot I don't know. I don't know astrophysics, and I don't know the intricacies of Wall Street finance. There's a lot I don't know. But here's what I do know. In life, there are certain things that just don't work. Self-pity, for instance, it doesn't work. Feeling sorry for yourself, it doesn't work. Worry, it doesn't work. Blaming others, it doesn't work. Bitterness doesn't work. Unresolved anger doesn't work. You say, what do you mean those things don't work? Those things have no capacity to make our lives better. Those kinds of things have never improved anyone's life. But faith-based trust and optimism based upon the goodness of God, now that's something that works. It's truly the only way to live. And here's something I've observed. There are people in life in absolutely identical circumstances. They've got the same health, they've got the same amounts of money, they've got the same types of children, they've got the same types of careers, and yet some of those people are living on the tarmac of life in a snowstorm, complaining about the conditions all the time. Just at the same time, there are others in the similar with the same conditions who are living above the clouds in bright sunshine, who, due to their faith-infused attitude, are literally filled with joy and peace and gratitude. The kind of people that you really want to be around. Others are cowering in a corner, miserable. The only difference, one possesses a faith-based attitude toward life, the other does not. Many years ago, I was at a Wendy's in Huntsville, and I just gotten a cell phone, like my first cell phone. This was a number of years ago. And an old man came over, and he asked me about the cell phone. And I mean, when I say he was old, he was probably 80 years old. And so he began to ask me about my cell phone. And then I began to understand that he really just wanted to talk. And so I just sat there and let him talk. He said, my name's Mr. Frank. He said, my wife died about 6 months ago. He said, I've been having to shut down my house. And he said, but he said, you know what? He said, when my wife was in the hospital at Crestwood Hospital, he said, those nurses were so good to her. He said, after she died, he said, I found out that one of them needed a refrigerator. He said, I had an extra refrigerator, so I went up and told them that they could have the refrigerator. He said, then it dawned on me how kind they had been to my wife during all that time that she had been in the hospital dying. He said, so I found out how many nurses worked on each shift of that floor of the hospital. He said, I went to the bank and I withdrew like 35 or 45 $50 bills. He said, I got thank you notes and I wrote a thank you note to every nurse and I put a $50 bill in every one of those notes. He said, then I went up to Crestwood Hospital at the first shift. I went up to the Crestwood Hospital at the second shift. I went up to the Crestwood Hospital at the third shift. He said, I gave each one of those nurses a thank you note and thanked them for taking care of my dear wife. He said, if you go up to the Crestwood Hospital today and you ask them about Mr. Frank, they'll tell you about Mr. Frank and about how much he loves them. And then he went on to say, I don't know how this came up. He said that he was a part of a retired men's group that met at the Piccadilly cafeteria in Huntsville. He said, just recently, he said, I was at that cafeteria. He said, I was having my meal with all these retired men. He said, I became disgusted. He said, because all they were doing was sitting around this table complaining about how bad life was and how they didn't like the government and how they didn't like this and how they didn't like that. He said the one who was complaining the most was complaining that his COLA, that his cost of living adjustment, had been cut. He said, now I know this man. He said, this man, this man has a good government pension. This man has over $500,000 in the bank. This man has a house that is paid for. And he's sitting in the middle of the Piccadilly in the United States of America complaining about his COLA being cut. He said, I had heard all of it I could hear. He said, I stood up at that table and I said to all those men sitting there complaining, I said, you all ought to be ashamed of yourselves. You are blessed and you ought to get on your knees and thank God today that you've got the lives that you've got the families that you've got the finances that you've got. You ought to be thanking God that rather than sitting around here complaining. He said, I told him I was tired of it and I wasn't going to listen to it anymore. He said, I turned and I left the Piccadilly cafeteria that day. And as I was preparing this study on attitude, I thought, here's a man who understands the power of attitude. You know what? You can go through life complaining and without any faith in God, or you can go through life with a deep and abiding sense of gratitude, thanking God for all the blessings that are in your life today. I'm here to tell you what the Apostle Paul said and what the psalmist said in Psalm 100 is the only way to live. God bless you, and thank you for being in this study with me today.